Perfect. So there's one of the big things with our institute, Liberum Research Institute. So it's a not-for-profit. It's focused on this next gen science called agent-based modeling. So we had been, the science has been around for a while, and it was obviously very simplified in the 70s and 80s, started to get some legs in the late 90s, but it was, you have, the simple prey predator model, right? Where you've got the deer and the wolf, and you create an algorithm for the deer and you create an algorithm for the wolf, and you let it run the simulation, and those interactions basically create an output for a balancing of this ecosystem. Fast forward from the 90s to the mid 2010s, you then had machine learning models. So instead of having an algorithmic approach to understanding an agent's behavior, you could model the behavior using machine learning models to build a more sophisticated model of what that would do. Where the problem ended up being is it's one thing to simulate the behavior of a deer and a wolf and how it would interact with an environment. It's another thing when you're talking about billions of human agents and their interaction between each other, and it being a exponential computational problem even for machine learning, where we think still it's going to be the 2030s, maybe the 2040s, if it gets so late, even on this exponential curve of being able to do these machine learning based neural network models of an agent, human or otherwise, and their ability to create interaction and predict the behavior of interaction. So we do a lot of this in our business because I've got customer service reps, I've got technology that automates messaging, chatbots, but then we have all these other agents. They refer their family and friends to get a loan with us. So there's a lot of agent interactions, and we build these simulation models. I'm wondering, from your perspective, I know agent simulation and simulation of environments, is getting more computationally friendly and is becoming more realistic. Is there things that you're seeing in the marketplace that's moving in that direction? And you may have heard of DeepMind. We actually had one of the top people and creators of DeepMind on at the Institute talking last year. Any thoughts on, Carnegie Mellon or the future or some of the PhD programs that you may have seen? Or
Yeah, I can't tell you about the commercial world because I'm not following products in that domain. But there are all kinds of synergies between, for example, the Robotics Institute and the Machine Learning Department, which are two components of the 7-component School of Computer Science at CMU. And one very famous project was robotic soccer. There happened to be international competitions among robotic soccer teams. And so you come and you deploy your robots and they deploy their robots, and we see at the end of the game who scored the most goals. And so this is an example of real-time agent cooperation, because all the players in the soccer field need to know where the other players are so they can determine when and where to pass to them. Okay? So they're communicating all the time. They're being made aware of where their teammates are and where the enemy are, or the opposing team. And of course, the opposing team is doing exactly the same thing to them, anticipating where lanes might open up that need to be closed so that a pass can't occur. And so a team that was led by Manuela Veloso, who's now the chief of AI at Morgan, she took emeritus status from CMU, went to Wall Street, won the international robotic soccer competition. And so what we're seeing is the application of various different technologies all coming together in synergy to solve problems. It seems to me that what one would love to do is to build the universal model of everything. That is, to understand exactly how humans work, exactly how economic forces impact things, exactly how physical laws like gravity and things like that influence the behavior of people and things. And so we have this percolating model of the world. And if you're interested in what would be the effect of, for example, a massive flood in Germany, okay, and you toss that into the system, and it predicts all kinds of things, like which kinds of supply chains are going to be interrupted, prices of what are going to go up, et cetera. It would be wonderful if we had such a thing. Problem is, building models like that is difficult. One of the reasons it's difficult is that in many cases, we only have experimental data about how things behave. We're not able to write down equations. Example, the three-body problem. Three-body problem, still not solved, right? There's no equation of motion that predicts the movement of three bodies. On the other hand, nature has no problem in simulating it, and simulation programs have no problem in simulating it. So we don't need to have exact formulas for things as long as we have enough data. So that goes back to the data science and how do you process mass quantities of data. It's impractical, I think, to even dream of building the kind of model that I was suggesting. The reason for that has to do with the hyper-exponential blow-up in computation time required to do anything. But we all know that approximation is sufficient. We don't have to optimize. We don't need exact answers. And so finding approximation methods is going to be a major factor in the multi-agent systems that you're talking about.
So one of the things which kind of gets on the edge, which is where it's academic and exciting, is quantum computing. Now, I hate using these buzzwords. In fact, at my old office, we had a whole list of words you're not allowed to use in the office: blockchain, AI, ML, quantum. But I've worked with some of the guys at D-Wave in Canada, and I've seen what Intel before COVID was proposing for some. I think it was like a 56 qubit architecture for computation. Are you guys seeing any, I guess not commercialization, but is the academic environment, and I know it's slightly removed from computer science, but obviously those of us who are computer science are really excited to get our hands on some architecture out there. And I think that Microsoft's building their own language, waiting for a lot of chip processing to come out. For 5 milliseconds, Google said they had was it quantum supremacy, and then that was kind of defeated. But any thoughts or perspectives on where that directional technology is going from an academic perspective?
Okay, so it's an arms race, and every week or two I see another article about some company or some country or some university claiming quantum supremacy, and that we've managed to build n qubits, and the next week we get 2 n qubits, et cetera. There are some serious issues in building large quantum computers, one of them being the inherently probabilistic nature of quantum mechanics, and so that the computations are inexact. The idea being that if you repeat them enough times, the probability of getting a correct answer approaches 1, but isn't 1. Another is that the number of different quantum algorithms that are known is very small. You can count them on 2 hands. And the big one everybody's excited about is factoring, because once you do factoring,
Yep.
RSA goes away as a security mechanism. But there's a lot more to the world than factoring. And so we don't know how to do, for example, we don't know how to run a quantum simulation of a neural network. And so if you wanted to build neural networks that had huge numbers of nodes, the biggest ones these days now have hundreds of billions of nodes. So let's go to hundreds of trillions. How do we simulate hundreds of trillions of neural network nodes on a quantum computer? We don't know how to do that now. And so I think a tremendous amount of work needs to go into the physical building of quantum computers, and a tremendous amount of work needs to go into the theoretical underpinnings of what can you really do with them. Sure, it's easy to imagine with superposition of states that you ought to be able to do things that are classically impossible. And that's probably true. The question is how, right? It's very tangible.
Yeah, I think I'm really excited at least to see the progress. I think everybody has their doomsday type scenarios. I'm not really of that thought. I think that there's two sides to that equation, but it also brings up, I think recently in the news, and we're a technology company, but we're also a lender, and we're constantly trying to be penetrated by cyber attacks constantly. And obviously, I think it was a few weeks ago, there was thousands of small businesses that had ransomware attacks all throughout the United States. And, there was political back and forth with who knows what's ever going to happen. Uh, and I've worked with a lot of the intelligence agencies and, FBI in the United States. And they're trying to figure out how to combat this problem. What's Carnegie Mellon doing on the cybersecurity side, and what's kind of the state of affairs? That's another arms race, right? That will never end, and only will get a bigger and bigger impact as the future comes. When we used to watch these movies about hackers and stuff like that in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and now that's all the war that we almost see on the news every day.
Yep, it's certainly spy versus spy, and it can never end, of course. What we're doing about it is, I think, on two fronts. So one is in the School of Computer Science, and particularly in the engineering school. People are designing the next internet, a safer, securer internet. In terms of real practical considerations, such as detecting malware attacks, most of that work is done in what's called the SEI, the Software Engineering Institute, not to be confused with the Institute for Software Research, which is a department that I'm a faculty member in. The SEI is Pentagon funded. It's a component of Carnegie Mellon University and pays for a lot of our overhead, but most of the work that it does is confidential. So it's separated from the academic part of CMU. We don't do secret work. The professors at CMU do not do secret work as part of their research. They may do it as consultants, but not as part of the university. So no student is ever inveigled into working on warlike projects. There's no such restriction at the Software Engineering Institute. And in fact, security clearances are required to go into certain areas there. And they are very actively working directly with the Pentagon and with Symantec and the big security companies on finding and diagnosing security threats. Unfortunately, because of the nature of the work, they don't say much about it. So I can't tell you what they're doing, but you might want to interview the head of the SEI. There's almost a blood-brain barrier. There are some people who work in both CMU and the SEI. That is the academic part of CMU and SEI. But in general, there's very little crosstalk between them because of the nature of the work. On the other hand, there was an old adage in building software systems that the first one you build to throw away, right? Because that's what tells you all the mistakes that you made in your design. The problem is the internet wasn't built that way. This is the one we built, and we haven't thrown it away yet. And the day may come when we have to throw it away because its security problems may not be patchable. A fundamentally new architecture might be required.
Yeah, it's exciting. I think I've seen, across all the tier 1 computer science programs, I don't know a single one that doesn't have cybersecurity as a component of education. And that war just is only getting worse.
Oh,
it's both. Go ahead.
I mean, we have a whole institute for it at CMU. In the academic part, there's a component that studies cybersecurity. But again, it's academic study.
Absolutely. And, I think it becomes more complicated. You talk about security clearances and stuff. It becomes more and more complicated as the combatant may or may not be a government, may or may not be other sovereign entities. And the politics and the geopolitics are now being fully integrated into cybersecurity. And how we deal with it, both offensively and defensively, will have to at some point become a geopolitical conversation.
when you say how we deal with it, how are we dealing with it? When every few weeks, tens of thousands of companies get attacked successfully. I'm not sure we're dealing with it. I think we're sitting around worrying about it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think the only solution I've heard is not a solution. It's buy more insurance, and hope to God that you don't have a major loss like an Equifax or another attack that shuts down everything. But I think it's also, so I've been, like I said, lecturing for not quite 2 decades, but the makeup of my student population in grad school is shifted. And I'm very apolitical. I'd say I travel constantly around the world. I have friends that are Chinese and Russian and Indian and all other parts of the world. But a lot of the U.S. companies get more and more scared when students that are, from a geopolitical standpoint, at conflict. I mean, theoretically, the institution of the university and education is completely separate from that. But there's been cases, unfortunately, where that hasn't been the case, and technology and intellectual property has been stolen or other people working for. So when you look on a forward basis, so my students in the QCF program, when I'm lecturing, I may have had a few white kids, no black kids, a bunch of Indians and Chinese. Now it's 90% Chinese students in my classes, many of them with multiple master's degrees, a few Indians, and that's about it. And it's been that way teaching class for almost a decade. Nothing positive or negative about the countries, but where does that put the academic institutions that are supporting students who are graduating and getting jobs out in the marketplace when there's such a political pushback? And does that affect anybody, or does academia not really have to take that into consideration?
Well, we certainly experienced a very similar phenomenon. For years, the majority of my students were Chinese. In last year, when people applied to my graduate program in AI and innovation, we had a huge drop in the number of Chinese applicants, huge. Largely, I think, because of President Trump's policies and animosity toward Chinese students, and also the blocking of Chinese students from certain universities believed to be affiliated with the Chinese military. That, strangely, was counterbalanced by a huge increase in the number of Indian applicants. In fact, the one almost perfectly balanced the other out, and we had almost exactly the same number of total applicants entering in September that we had a year ago. In fact, our applications have been flat at about 850 for 4 years in a row, plus or minus 5. It just hasn't varied from that. I'm expecting that this coming year it'll go way up again, because I think with the Biden administration, a lot of Chinese students will return to the fray. So we have a changing mixture of national origins and ethnicities. But one thing remains constant, and that is a minority of Americans.
Yeah, unfortunately.
And the question is, what does that say about the United States and the priorities of students in the United States as to what they're willing to study? It says bad things. China, of course, announced that it intends to be world dominant in AI by 2030. And one mechanism that they have for doing that is sending all their students over here to learn AI. And at the same time, our Americans are not learning AI because there are too few of them. And when the Chinese go back to China, we will indeed have trained them.
Yeah, brain drain.
Yeah. And so was it Khrushchev who said that the Americans will sell us the rope with which we will hang them?
Yeah, it's very unfortunate. I mean, it's not only is it a true statement, but it's a growing statement. I had an employee who had graduated from Emory. She did a finance degree, but it wasn't a STEM degree. And she is now, unfortunately, back in South Korea. She was top of her class at Emory, and I think there's definitely a major disconnect in the policy of how do you get the top students, at our top schools not able to even stay in the country because they can't get sponsorship. I think that's just that's a whole nother conversation. But I also think like whenever it comes to competition, what I've seen though is with now, sure, we're in a Zoom era now. We take it for granted, whether it's my Microsoft Teams, which we're using. But, I've got, hundreds of employees in India that I do collaboration with. I'm doing, like I said, I've got team members in Costa Rica and Panama, all throughout the United States. And even pre-COVID, we were a semi-in-person, mostly virtual company back then. And it's only grown more so from that standpoint. Does the United States have the advantage of being able to have maybe the top creative minds that stay here, which you don't need high percentage, you need a few really great people to kind of drive the innovation and creativity over the long run. And that's unfortunately that's kind of how it's been for decades. It's not a recent phenomenon. It's been like this since the 90s.
Yeah, so I've never bought into the doctrine that says that Americans are creative and nobody else is. So we satisfied ourselves for a long time with the suggestion that the Chinese educational system is rigid. Basically it rewards followers, not leaders. It doesn't like people who think differently from the others. That's inconsistent with communist doctrine, for example.
Yeah.
And it's all nonsense. Okay, there are plenty of creative thinkers in every corner of the globe, everywhere.
Absolutely.
The idea now, there's no question, of course, that the rewards and punishments of a culture can suppress one's instinct to create. But that doesn't mean that the instinct isn't there. And so I have not found that Americans are creatively brilliant and people from outside the United States aren't. I've never,
the equation's not there anymore.
I've never seen that. Now, what we're doing by admitting students from all over the place, we're treating the world as if everybody is an individual and nations don't exist. The idea being that if everybody feels that way, then national boundaries really don't mean anything, and that the innovations in any field are going to be equally shared with everybody else. Exactly. What has interfered with that, of course, is the attitude of the nations from which these people come.
Yep.
And so the Platonic ideal of let's all get together in a room and the best ideas are going to be shared among everybody, that ideal may be tarnished by politics. But ultimately, the progress of science depends on people exercising their greatest possible creativity.
Absolutely.
And so if the other problem comes from the political domain, then we're going to have to ask politicians to solve that part of the problem. But I don't think, for example, it would be wise for a university, for example, the great AI programs, to stop taking Chinese applicants because we don't want China to become supreme in AI.
Yeah, that's just a losing errand. Absolutely agree with that. So here's a slightly different topic with the students. So obviously, so I didn't actually lecture during COVID because for me personally, I love the interaction. I love us thinking creatively. And when I started lecturing and I had my boxes of students on the screen, just lost so much ability to have that creative thought and creative discussion and almost like a interactive ability. Now, we have to do what we have to do. And even in our company, like I said, we're mostly been remote, just generally speaking, pre-COVID. But, one of the things I do is I fly all of our main people into Atlanta for in-person, usually 2-3 day of basically going through ideas. Now that, a lot of COVID restrictions are being lifted, minus some of the stuff on the Delta variant stuff, where does academia sit in terms of creativity and having physical in-person classes? What do we lose? What do we gain? And is it similar from that standpoint where that creative thought and discussion makes a difference being in person?
Yeah, I taught a lot during COVID, and I didn't do it in person. I taught 2 courses at CMU and 1 course for the University of Hong Kong, all completely remote during COVID time. And fundamentally, it has to do with the population size that you're talking about. I ran a research project, or independent study project, with 4 students. That was completely successful. We were able to meet. We all saw each other on the screen large enough that we could actually see people's expressions on their faces. And it was almost indistinguishable from being in the same room. When I taught to the University of Hong Kong, I had 80 students. I couldn't see individual faces. I was talking at a wall.
Yep.
And I really didn't like it. And if you talk to actors, many movie actors will tell you that they prefer the stage because that's where they get the feedback. That's where they get the energy. They see how their audience is reacting to them, and they can tailor their presentation to that. When you're doing 80 takes in front of a movie camera, you can't do that. The only person that gives you feedback is the director. And so I'm really looking forward to being in the physical classroom again, starting at the end of August this year. That said, we're never going to go back to the old normal.
Yeah.
For example, every classroom at CMU has been Zoom outfitted, which means that even when we're doing physical classes, we're going to Zoom record everything, because the students have reported that it's incredibly useful to them to be able to review, possibly multiple times, going over the same point in a lecture that they didn't understand. Many of them find it useful so they can cut class, for example. They don't have to come to class because they can always review the video. And also it provides a core of recorded lectures that faculty can use one to the other. Because I can't physically attend a lot of courses that I would like to.
Absolutely.
For example, they may occur at the same time that I'm teaching.
Sure.
If the other lecturer is recording his quantum computing lectures, then I can view those. So it creates intellectual capital by using Zoom technology. But the idea of lecturing to 80 people over Zoom, I don't want to say completely useless, but it certainly doesn't have the advantages of the crackling excitement of being in a room and facing all of those questions. I found that people were far less inclined to ask questions over Zoom
100%.
than they would be in a real classroom, where they can kind of look at each other and, did you understand that? I don't know.
I think that actually reminds me of scene in is it Ferris Bueller's Day Off, where they have all the recorders in the class and the students recording at every one of the tables with the recorders, and then even the professor at the very end is playing back his lecture on a recording to the other recorders. Or maybe that was another movie about college, but no, I definitely agree. And I also think it's a little bit different department, but the business school and Harvard Business School, case study method, and you've got Tepper. It's a very intimate interaction, and there's a lot of thinking and creativity that goes. So it's good to hear that, and I kind of agree that the small scale format of a few people or several people, you can still have the creativity and the discussion whenever you can see the screen and there's not that many people and you can see all the interactions. But I definitely agree that. So they asked me if I wanted a lecture for last fall and this spring. And I was like, guys, there's 30, 40 people in a class. Exact same experience. Nobody was asking questions. It's hard to read people. People would turn off their video, so you don't even know if they're paying attention. And it just the dynamic is just completely different from that standpoint. But I also agree on the flip side. So I teach class even at my company and to all of our employees. But at the same time, they all want to go back and review content. We have all of our senior leadership teach class every single month. And the review concept makes a lot of sense. But the interaction concept, it's very hard. So we ended up creating 2 formats where it's more like this, where we have a interactive dialogue that's recorded. But when we were doing in-person hybrid model, we would have more questions and interaction with the people in the audience. So we had almost 2 types of recording. The only reason why I say that is Where do you think the future of education is going? And, obviously we've had the MOOCs, we've got, Carnegie Mellon has pioneered, and Georgia Tech has, we have a master's degree program that you can do it all online. I've got 4 kids, all not teenage daughters yet, they're about to be, and they're going to be looking at schools sometime soon. And the tier 1 schools, they're not going to go away. It's like a tier 1 golf course. The best golf courses are going to stay around. The rest of them are going to go bankrupt. But is the future of even the tier 1 school evolving? What is Carnegie Mellon over the next 5-10 years? What's that vision? Obviously can't look maybe that far out, but is it in class with Zoom, with interaction and more? Any ideas or thoughts, or what are you guys seeing?
Oh yeah, I have a lot of ideas, and my colleagues don't agree with them. I love lecturing. I've done it for many years. I'm good at it. In the year 2000, I gave 500 lectures.
Wow.
That's an average of 2 every working day for the entire year. I'm good at it. The problem is that lecturing is too easy for me, and it's too easy for the students, because the students just sit there.
Yep.
Some of them listen, some of them eat, some of them sleep, some of them read email, some of them have earbuds and they listen to music. It's too easy for them. They believe that all they have to do is show up, get marked as present, and they've done what they have to do. And so I want courses that require investment by both the professor and the students. And the one way you get investment in the students is you make them work. You make them learn by doing instead of learning by listening.
Yep.
And the whole
Absolutely.
nature of lecture, right? It comes from Latin. It's reading, right? The lecturer used to read from a book, okay? And so when you read, people listen. It's learning by listening. It doesn't get embraced by the student. So for 18 years, I ran a program that had no courses. An entire degree program. It's the only one of its kind. An entire degree program that had no courses, 0. And what we did was, it was a program in e-business technology. And the idea was that when the students arrived, it was a 12-month program. They had to go, no summer vacation, total 12 months. When the students arrived, we gave them the surprise news that they're not really students, but they are employees of a fictitious e-business consulting company. And they have a manager whom they will never meet, but they will get memos from him describing clients and describing a client problem. And they will have 2 weeks as a team in order to develop a solution to the client's problem. Then they will have to present that solution. And right after that's done, they're going to get another memo from their manager about a different client with a different problem, and they're going to have to solve that one. And they did this, we made them do this 16 different times. And 4 times during the year, we would permute the teams so people were working with different sets of people all the time. After that was all over, the 16 of these things, there was an artificiality to it. And that is that they knew that the companies weren't real, although companies actually were real, but the problems we gave them were not real problems that those companies were attacking. And so they did not know, we did not know, and their sponsors, like their parents, did not know whether they would really be able to do this in practice. So we had a practicum in which we asked outside companies to fund problems which the students would work on for 14 weeks. And they had to do exactly the same thing that they did previously, except it was a real problem of real interest to a paying company. And that was the proof of the pudding. And so they went through an entire 12 months of school without taking a course. And it was incredibly effective. And what I've done in the courses that I teach is I've tried to convert them as much as possible where the students are learning by doing work instead of learning by listening to me. Because I like to hear myself talk too much. And some of them like to hear me talk because when I'm talking, they don't have to do anything. They can just sit there and listen. And when they're doing that, they're not learning. There are all kinds of psychological studies that show that if you give a lecture and then you give a quiz to the students as they're leaving the lecture room, you give them a quiz as to what they've learned, they will typically retain about 10% of the material.
Yeah, geez.
Okay. Now, by exam time, unless they cram and review, their retention has gone down to about 3%. Now, there's no industrial process in the world that would live with a yield of 3%. Okay? And so something is fundamentally wrong with the process. Oh, no, by the way, if you ask them a year later, it's down to 1%.
Absolutely. Too many distractions now.
Now, what that proves is that learning by listening does not cause learning to occur. It causes time to be wasted. And so the skills that we teach students in universities are essentially useless. The thing that students are best at after they've been through university and graduate school is taking courses. They're really champs at taking courses because they've done that more than anything else during their university experience. Then they go and get a job and they never take a course again. And so why have we spent all of this time training them to take courses? Okay, let's look at individual courses. What do we do in individual courses? What do we train them to do? We train them to do homework and pass exams. They get really good at passing exams. Then they go to a job and they never have another exam. So why are we training them to pass exams when that is not the skill that's required for them in the rest of their lives? Okay? Now, I say stuff like this to my colleagues and they look like, Shamos, you're just getting too old here. Okay? Something's not right. Because why? Because it's always been done that way.
Yep.
All of my colleagues are used to doing it that way. They know how to create an exam. Students maybe don't love the exams, but at least they're familiar with the format. And so they're nervous when you give them a course that doesn't have an exam or a course that doesn't have homework. It bothers them. Why? Because we've trained them. We've made a compact with them, which is I'm going to give you a textbook. And at the end of every chapter, there are going to be some problems. And there's a promise that if you mastered the material in this chapter, you will be able to do the problems at the end of the chapter, and so on all the way through the book. And there's a promise that if you learn all the material in the course, you will be able to answer all the questions on the final exam. Okay? And you know what happens if you violate that promise? The students scream. They say, it's not fair. Okay. Then they get out into a job and they're given a problem. And there's no promise. There's no material that they've been given that is guaranteed to get them to the solution of the problem. And it's not fair, but they eventually realize that, you know what? What's not fair is that my school did not prepare me for this. Mm-hmm. That's the part that's not fair. And so I don't do that. What I try to do is ease the transition as much as possible between graduate school and a job. I try to make our training as much like being at a job as possible. And so they're completely used to it when they actually get to a job. But there's this belief that academia is pure and it has its methodology, and that if we do our thing right, then when the students get out, they'll be fine in a job. Well, it's not true. One of the things you need to do at a job is work as part of a team. Nobody works alone.
Yeah.
But effort in a university is solo, because you take an exam, you get an individual grade. Therefore, it even hurts you to help your colleagues.
Yeah.
Because they're your competitors. If there are only a certain number of A+ to be given out, you want to get one of them. We don't train them to work in teams. And so the first day on the job, they don't have a clue what to do when they're put in a room with 5 other people and they have to figure out who's good at what, how are we going to divide the labor, etc. And then how is my management going to evaluate me? Like my professor evaluated me with an examination. And how am I going to be evaluated in the job? And so it's very strange. It's the difference between being in the womb and being in the real world.
Yeah.
So what happens when the calf is born? It has to learn very quickly. It has to learn how to walk very fast because it didn't get any walking preparation when it was in the womb. Okay? The problem is that instead of lasting months, our womb lasts for over a decade when students are in school. And they're completely unprepared to walk on their 4 legs when they get out of the university. And so I don't like it. And I think that all academic institutions need to reevaluate what they're actually doing. Now, that kind of training is perfect for people who are going to become professors.
Sure,
because
absolutely.
they're going to do exactly the same thing for the rest of their life that they did in university. But if they're not going to be a professor, it's not the right preparation for them.
It also, reminds me of, so I've been a pilot for 8, 9 years, and the learning process is all about making mistakes without dying.
Mm-hmm.
And that's all we do.
Well,
It's constant.
it's the ultimate learning by doing, right?
Absolutely.
You
But
got to get up there and fly.
and it's interesting though, because so we've got a huge amount when you do IFR or instrument only rated pilot training. I've got a lot of books,
Mm-hmm.
and the expectation is I got to memorize it. I've got friends who are great academically. They can read through it all, memorize it all, the rote memory, and then regurgitate it on the oral exam and regurgitate it on the online exam. But I don't have time. I've got 4 kids, I've got hundreds of employees, a lot of fun nonprofits that I work with. But being able to go through the physical experience and then combine it with the actual material and content and the lecture allows me to connect the dots between what is it that I'm doing and why is it being done that way. And so I 100% agree that there's this like cyclical nature between education and reality. So I'm really excited to hear that, because a lot of the concepts that we teach, even in our own company, we shifted away from things that are ideas and cool in the future to what are we about to do in the next 3 months and how can we apply this technology to solve these problems. So there's a sense of urgency, like, oh my goodness, I better pay attention because this stuff is being implemented right now. And then I've seen great colleges that have started to embrace that. I remember there was a bunch of kids in the industrial engineering department who their capstone project was. They were interviewing CEOs of companies to do research projects just like you talked about. So I think universities are starting to catch the drift, especially schools that are more pragmatic and are going to get students to not be academic. They're going to be more in industry, to engage with industry more, but also do what other companies can't do, which is a lot of the research and understanding and figuring out problems behind the scenes that they're not able to do themselves. So let's talk about just wrapping it up here. Talk about the student experience. I did get to check out the great racquetball courts at Carnegie Mellon when I was doing my walkthrough there. The phenomenal chefs at the different dorm rooms. The a lot of the history of some of the greatest professors. Period. And like I said, family, friends, and family members that have not only attended but were professors and heads of departments there. What is the Carnegie Mellon experience for those in our audience? And to give you context, we have about half industry and about half students. And they're literally from all over the world. We have about 50, 60 countries that are represented that come to our programming. There's thousands of people that come and check out our programming and lectures and stuff like that. So for those of the students out there that may be undergrad going into grad school or looking at different programs, can you tell us a little bit about maybe how is your capstone project? What are the students going through for graduating? What's the edge that Carnegie Mellon has? And, raise your Carnegie Mellon flag and brag about what's awesome about CMU these days.
Yeah, we don't have enough time for me to do all the bragging that I would love to do about Carnegie Mellon. So I'll just tell you a quick anecdote. So I have a very small family, and I have one second cousin, and his partner. He and a partner run a talent agency in New York City, and one of their kids was interested in CMU, and so they contacted me saying, can you help? Can you write a letter? Is it okay if we come and visit you and talk about CMU, et cetera? And so I took him around the university, and then of course there are people who give tours of the university. And at the end of the day, he and his parents, and it's always a tense thing, right? Because the kid's there and the parents have goals and expectations for the kid. And sometimes the kid is fully embracing them and sometimes is rebelling. He came back to my office and he said of the experience, what he saw that day, he said, "These are my peeps." meaning I fit in completely right here. Now, not everybody does. And what he meant by his peeps are the kind of geeky people who were really interested in technology and proud of being interested in technology. The university experience tends to be stressful, but not because we apply the pressure, because the students themselves are so heavily self-motivated. And so I keep telling people when they come here, everybody is smart. The a priori probability when you see somebody that he's smarter than you is 1 in 2, okay? And it's the same thing that I tell them about the professors. I say, the professors are not smarter than you are. They know more and they've done more, but they're not smarter. You can become just like them. And the university, I've been associated with a number of academic institutions. My father was a department head at New York University. And so when I was a kid, I had experience with professors and deans and things like that. CMU is non-siloed in the sense that if any two faculty in any two departments want to set up a joint research project, all it requires is a handshake. There's no formality whatsoever to it. If you want to set up a degree program, there's some degree of formality to that, but there's no barrier to it. There's nobody who's saying, oh, that's our stuff and you can't do that, et cetera. We just don't have it. And the School of Computer Science in particular is so large, as I said, that if you can dream up a topic in computer science, we've got 5 people who are already doing it. That's not possible at small computer science departments where there might be 30 faculty, for example. By the way, there's no department in the School of Computer Science that's as small as that. And yet sometimes that's the size of the entire computer science department at another institution. So if you want to go to somebody and have them and talk to them about a particular topic that you're interested in, you can't do it at many other institutions. But at CMU, you have a choice of whom you'd like to go talk to because there are so many of them. And eventually, the size creates synergism. It's true, it makes it difficult to know everybody. I certainly don't know all the faculty. I wouldn't recognize them if I stepped over them. On the other hand, if I want to seek somebody out, it's trivial. I go to the directory and I get their email address and boom, we're in contact. So nothing is off limits because there's no field that we don't have somebody who's an expert at. And you just don't get that somewhere else. And it's true of a number of other places in CMU, particularly the engineering school, also drama, which after years of competing with Yale Drama School, several years ago moved into the #1 slot in Best Drama School. So we have some isolated real peaks of quality at CMU. We also have tremendous cooperation from the city and the state. So there are many places that universities live where the relationship between town and gown is not so friendly. That's particularly true in what you would call college towns, where essentially the biggest thing in the town is the college, like State College, Pennsylvania, where Penn State is. We don't have that. Pittsburgh is big enough that CMU certainly wouldn't be dominant. Even the University of Pittsburgh, which is far larger, is not dominant. And so the city's universities have become a point of pride for the city. And we get immense cooperation from city agencies, from city businesses, et cetera. They don't despise the fact that we're here. They love the fact that we're here. And that creates a different mood. When you go around town and people look up to you because you're a student at CMU, instead of looking down at you because you're a member of a noisy frat, it's just a very different atmosphere. We have frats. I don't want to say we don't have. We've got them. It's just that they don't have a reputation for example, hazing and destructiveness and things like that. So the residential experience at CMU is quite fine. The universities in Pittsburgh mostly are located in residential neighborhoods, not in the downtown. And so there's plenty of literal residential housing. I mean, you can rent apartments in houses rather than in large high-rise apartments. It's very pleasant living.
Perfect. Well, Last year was probably the first time in a decade that I had not attended a Pittsburgh Steelers game, and gone and visited my hometown. But I will definitely be up there. I've actually had employees and students do grad school both at Tepper and in different departments at Carnegie Mellon. So I always love CMU. And I think I was going to do a double major, not only in computer science, but performance music. You guys have one of the best performance music programs in the entire country. Measures up to even Juilliard. So I love that program there as well. And really excited to come up there, shake your hand in person, Professor. It was really wonderful to have you on board, and I'm sure we'll send you more information as the years go on, and we try to create this collective really of top people in the world in different industries, both academic and private sector, around not only computer science, artificial intelligence, and machine learning models, but where that is going as far as things like agent-based modeling and simulation, combining those techniques. And then we've talked to a lot of the people in the hardware space, building the architecture for a lot of these systems. So it's been really, really exciting to meet amazing people. So I will definitely, next time I'm up in Pittsburgh, I'll coordinate our schedules and make sure we grab a bite or say hello, worst case scenario.
Oh, I hope I can get you to a Steelers game. It's not easy because the home games have been sold out since 19.
I know. Thankfully, having been, our family been there since the 60s, 70s, we do have a lot of family friends in Pittsburgh that have got season tickets. So I'm always banging on their door to figure out how we could get to a game. Maybe we could join and check it out across the street. So
That'd be great. Well, thanks for the opportunity to be here.
thanks so much, Professor. Take care. We'll talk soon.
Bye.